Hey readers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and today I'm going to be doing my June reading wrap-up. I read several books in June, pretty sure it was 8, and we're going to be going through all of them. So let's just have a look at what I read. It was a good reading month. The first book that I read was called The Beautiful Ones, and it was by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. She's also the author of Mexican Gothic, which I have read, and I liked the writing style a lot. I actually liked The Beautiful Ones better because it was just a really very charming romance. It features a heroine who doesn't really fit in with typical girlish pursuits, and she's also telepathic, and she is looking for her match. And basically, Moreno-Garcia has created this fantasy society that has kind of Pride and Prejudice or like more, restrictive society romance vibes. But at the same time, you have, these people who have incredible powers who are also looking for love. The writing was really beautiful. It's actually a fairly straightforward romance, but I was totally into it the entire time. And, I was really happy with the ending. The next book that I read was absolutely fantastic. It's called Nothing to Envy, and it's by Barbara Demick. So one of my most recent reviews was Eat the Buddha, which is another book by Demick, where she talks about Tibet. Nothing to Envy is a book in which she chronicles the lives of people in North Korea, most of whom have defected, so she's able to interview them. And again, it is just such an interesting book because Demick does a really good job of getting into kind of the nitty gritty of these people's lives. She finds people who were always kind of chafing at the society around them. She also interviews people who really wanted to fit into that society, who genuinely, unironically loved Kim Jong-il and his father. She does a really good job of detailing, how things started out actually pretty well within North Korea, and then how society started to decline when aid from other communist powers stopped coming in, and what adjustments the government had to make to do that, and the cost the people of North Korea ultimately paid in order to accommodate that. She also does a really good job of capturing, I think, how hard it is for people who have come from North Korea to integrate into South Korean society, because even though they're one people and both countries sort of talk about it as if they are one people, they're really not anymore after so many decades of developing separately. And there's something that's really deeply sad and also profound about that and about Demick's approach to talking about it. So if you want another really well-researched, very sensitive, very humane, and interesting piece of nonfiction, then I think Nothing to Envy is a wonderful choice. I really like Demick's work. I know she's got one other book out that I will be tracking down because it's awesome. After that, I read The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about basically a school for bad boys that has a secret graveyard because the abuses of children there, especially Black children, are so horrific that they've tried to hide it, to literally bury it for decades, and then things start to come to light. So it's one of the former students' memories of what happened and what it's done to him and how it's affected his life. It's a really profound book. There are some aspects of the end that are kind of twisty that I didn't particularly like, but I thought that the writing was really good. The horror that Colson Whitehead evokes about that school is intense. And it was really a good read. And also, frankly, it was short, and that's a mercy. I read a lot of really long books, and this one really packed a lot of punch in a really small number of pages, and I was impressed with that. This next book was more teachery. I read Minds on Fire by Mark Carnes, and this is a book that basically describes the impact and the importance of a role-playing series of games in classes that's called Reacting to the Past. And it's basically about how students can become extra engaged with history and end up working harder than they've ever worked for a class because they're playing a game. And so Reacting to the Past sets that up for students in a number of different historical settings with different issues. Everybody plays a character, they have different goals. But it's a class where you're writing speeches and you're having passionate arguments in the roles of historical figures. And it's something that has the power, apparently, to really capture students' imaginations and transform how they understand school and history. And so it was just a really fascinating read. I don't completely buy into everything that Carnes says. I think he might have oversold his beloved method a little bit. But it's super interesting, and I would really like to both play a Reacting to the Past game and run one with students at some point because it's really interesting. After that, I read a light and fluffy book. I read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. And it's basically about the son of the President of the United States falling in love with a Prince of England. It is adorable. And I just really liked how fluffy it was. In some ways, actually my biggest problem with the book is that because it's set in like a post-Obama America, reading about politics and like the stress of elections, which is part of the plot, was actually the worst part for me because I'm basically truly traumatized by our political system right now. And it took me out of the romance. But the romance part was super cute. I really enjoyed it. I would definitely read McQuiston's next book. I think they have one about women who fall in love, but it's also like they're from other times. That sounds pretty cool. So I'll probably be looking that one up. I also read a big chunky travelogue this month. I read Ian Frazier's Travels in Siberia, and this is kind of a sprawling but just really charming account of this author's multiple trips to Siberia. He basically has a midlife crisis where he falls in love with Russia, starts learning Russian, starts reading Russian literature, and takes a bunch of trips to Russia, and he becomes really fascinated with Siberia in particular. So this travelogue is both about the awkwardness of just trying to travel through a hostile place, and it's interspersed with all these really fun accounts of people who historically were exiled to Siberia, literature about Siberia, Russian authors, and, folk tales and other just stories that emerge from Siberia as a place and from the tension of being sent there. And it's really fascinating. It's funny. You learn a lot about what happens when you have to go to the bathroom in extremely cold temperatures. You get pea icicles coming up out of the ground that melt later. It's gross, but it's fascinating. I highly recommend this as a read if you want to, take an adventure somewhere new with someone who really loves where he's going. Probably not the best book I read this month. That would be Nothing to Envy. But maybe the most important book for me, and I'm gonna review it separately, is Forget the Alamo. This book has 3 authors. They are Bryan Burrough, Chris Tomlinson, and Jason Stanford. And these are 3 guys who live in Texas. They write about Texas, and they wrote about the Alamo. So the Alamo, I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I took Texas history. I took the school field trip to the Alamo. So this is all part of my personal history as well as just history in general. It was really interesting because Forget the Alamo is basically about how the traditional story of the Alamo is a myth with extreme white supremacist overtones. I wouldn't even call them undertones. And, the real history of the Texas Revolution and who got left out is actually a really compelling story. And it's something that is worth our attention. So this book is partially about Texas history as the evidence indicates it really happened. And then the second part of the book is about kind of how the story of the Alamo developed and how we as a society continue to fight about it. So both parts of the book were super interesting for me, and I will be talking more about that in a separate video because I think it's really worth the time. After that, I read my Book of the Month Club book, and that was The Maidens. So, The Maidens I picked up because it kind of was giving me Secret History by Donna Tartt vibes. It's by the same author as The Silent Patient. And it's about basically these girls called the Maidens who have a weird cult-like group where they follow a hot but also kind of off-putting professor of Greek tragedy, and then murders start to happen. So there's a woman who's a therapist. She's experienced a huge loss in her life. She goes to support her niece who just had one of her friends get murdered on campus, and the thriller evolves from there. So if you want to read about, Cambridge and kind of a creepy academic atmosphere and Greek tragedy, then this book is fun. Is it as good as The Secret History? No, it is not. But I really got a kick out of it. I gave it 3 stars. It's like a Greek tragedy thriller beach read. Go for it. I also read some chick lit this month. The first one I read was sort of an atypical chick lit because it is set in Saudi Arabia. I read Girls of Riyadh by Rajaa Alsanea. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I should have looked it up. But it is very interesting because it's really like a very typical work of chick lit. You've got these girls that are falling in love. They're finding, they're trying to meet guys and date them. Things go wrong. Hearts get broken. Parents are disappointed. There's nothing that racy in it for a Western reader like myself. But I think that's what makes it so interesting because this book was banned in Saudi Arabia. And it was quite the scandal when the book came out. And, to me as an American reader, that's hilarious because it is not spicy at all compared to, things that young adults in this country read. At the same time, this book gave all kinds of cool insights into Saudi Arabian culture. So I learned about numbering, where like young men basically like throw their phone numbers at girls and hope to get a call because they're so desperate to meet someone, to date somebody. I learned a lot about what is considered cute, like how courtship works, how relationships can develop, the use of the internet in developing those relationships. It was super interesting to see, romantic challenges happen, but in the context of another society that has different limits than the one I live in. At the same time, it was also kind of typical chick lit. If you're expecting something super profound, I would not necessarily look to this. It was really like Sex in the City, but the city is Riyadh. It's cool. And then the last book of the month that I read was so saccharine, so adorable. It was called Tweet Cute, and it is by Emma Lord, and it's about these two teenagers who fall in love by fighting with each other on their parents' restaurants' Twitter accounts because somebody steals a recipe and chaos ensues. It was great. And then at the same time, they are chatting, but they don't know it on an app that one of them has developed for people at their school, so they can secretly talk to each other. But, they could find out who the other person is at any moment. It just hasn't happened yet. And there's a lot of drama to that as well. It wasn't a perfect book. Honestly, the adults in this book really sucked and needed so much help. But the kids were super cute. And, their little tweets to each other were adorable. And their little Twitter war was so sweet, even though it was also really brutal. And, I really thought it was just a warm, quick afternoon read. And, I found myself smiling at the book, even though it is very ridiculously cheesy. And that is a book pun, as you'll find out if you read the book. But definitely go for it if you're looking for something cute. Tweet cute, in fact. So those are the books that I read in the month of June. I'm already looking forward to what I'm going to be reading in July. But I'll conclude this wrap up here and look out for a video about Forget the Alamo in the near future. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment if you read anything good last month. And happy reading.